Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 90 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I'm joined by Mike Koomar, and Mike and I are going to spend the entire episode, for the most part, focusing on what was a pretty epic Saturday in college hoops, as we're pretty in the thick of conference play. Mike, a lot of upsets really this whole week, if you go back to Wednesday, Thursday, and now today. But let's start off with a game that was not an upset. Number 1 Auburn, still without Janai Broome with his ankle injury, goes into now ranked Georgia and pulls off a 2-point win. They led for most of this one, and they just pull it off. But, Mike, since Broome went down, it doesn't look like Auburn is slowing down at all.
Yeah, you can tell Auburn isn't necessarily the same team without Janai Broome, but they had a big win earlier this week against Mississippi State. They dominated at home, a 22-point victory against a good Mississippi State team, I would say. And then they go to Georgia, which has got to be a tough place to play because this is about the first year in maybe 20 years that people have been excited about Georgia basketball. So not an easy crowd to play in front of. A little shaky down the stretch without Janai Broome, I will say. I was watching this game a little bit, Sean, and with about a minute to go, it looked like this thing was all wrapped up. I think with Pettiford made a couple of free throws to make it a 9-point game with about 40 seconds left. And despite that, Georgia had a shot that almost went in to send this game to overtime. So I am a little bit concerned, if I'm being honest, with Auburn without Janai Broome, but he's going to be back soon, and he's going to make a big impact. Look, they've got the whole week off, which is going to give even more time to Broome for him to be able to get healthy for that huge tip-off against a Tennessee team that's struggling a little bit right now. But that's going to be a huge game for Auburn.
And, Mike, the internal rumors coming from Auburn is that the Tennessee game was circled as a potential return date for Broome. Like, that was the target to get him in there for that game. Obviously, you get the week as a team. Like, I think without getting any super inside knowledge, all signs should point to him playing next Saturday unless something happens. That will be in Auburn, which should give the Tigers a slight advantage, but that'll be a good one. That is 8:30 p.m. next Saturday on ESPN. All right, Mike, we're going to go over to the Big 12 for now. And the number 2 Iowa State Hawkeyes go down. Sorry, they're not the Hawkeyes. They're the Cyclones. West Virginia 64, Iowa State 57. DeVries and Javon Small. Mike, they've got to be one of the more surprising teams this year. They continue to win. They're 13-4. They had a good non-conference, and so far they're holding serve in the Big 12.
Yeah, they've been really hot and cold in the Big 12 season, I will say. A narrow victory over a pretty bad Colorado team. They got smoked at home against Arizona, who I do think Arizona is a really good team, despite their loss today.
And, Mike, remember, they played in Atlantis, too, Arizona and West Virginia, and the Mountaineers won. That doesn't count as a Big 12 game, but just an interesting throw-out-the-tape type of game, I think.
Absolutely. And I will say, I do think Arizona's improved a lot since Atlantis. I think that Arizona will be a tournament team, and I think despite their loss today against Texas Tech, they will be a top 25 team in the coming weeks. I've said that for a couple weeks now. But back to the Mountaineers. One thing that's so special about them is that they've had the 2 best wins in the Big 12 so far this season. They've got the signature win on the road against Kansas at Fog Allen, which is a crazy upset. Nobody saw that coming. And then today against Iowa State, who I will say is clear-cut the second-best team in the country going into this afternoon's game. They've been on a roll, and they had a big statement win against Kansas earlier on in the week where they won by 17 points. So West Virginia proving they're a tough place to play and proving that this is a really tough out in the Big 12. Even this is an off year for the Big 12, they're still going to have a lot of teams playing in March at the NCAA tournament, and you've got a lot of teams that can compete with any team in college basketball. So even in the off year, these Big 12, they've still got teams that can take down anybody.
And Mike, I'll go back to Arizona for a second. Their numbers are terrific, honestly. They're top 20 in every metric, top 15 in some. Like, they're going to get in if they have a good enough record. And if they have a good enough record, they're probably not going to be near the bubble. It's just one of those things that we talked about Michigan State last year. And, maybe some of their flaws come up if they're on the bubble, but if they win enough games, they'll be away from it. I think Arizona's really good. Obviously, a 4-game winning streak before today, and I just think that they're finding their feet a little bit here. Obviously, the Big 12 is really tough, and you got to think 500 in the league probably gets you comfortably into the field.
Yeah.
And for West Virginia, Mike, Tucker DeVries is still out. Coach Darian DeVries is still having to deal without, probably his second best player. Javon Small obviously carries the way today. Big win for the Mountaineers. The Cyclones were 1 for 17 from 3. That's probably not going to happen very often. And I don't think many warning signs come for Iowa State out of that one. They get UCF at home before a road trip next weekend to the Arizona schools. But I don't think there's much concern with Iowa State here.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this was a really terrible shooting day. Like we said, 1 of 17 from behind the arc. They also only got 7 free throw attempts in this game. That's really, really low. So West Virginia was able to play some good physical defense, as you can tell, by Iowa State only scoring 57 points, but they didn't get in foul trouble. So that was really unique. Look, Iowa State still rebounded West Virginia by 10. It was 38-28. So, look, am I comfortable saying that West Virginia is a better team than Iowa State? No, I think West Virginia caught them on a bad day. But that's not to say anything disrespectful about West Virginia. They're doing a lot with the lack of talent that they've got currently starting. So kudos to West Virginia, especially with some star players that are out.
And West Virginia, like, the toughness was still there from Iowa State. Like, I think they're okay. Like,
absolutely.
Sometimes you're just going to have bad shooting performances. We've praised their offense this year for being, kind of a lot better than it's been over the past couple of years of TJ Otzelberger, but this was the first, really poor offensive performance of the day. And when you're on the road in the Big 12, you're probably going to lose if you don't play well. And that's kind of what happened today. All right, Mike, let's go to the SEC, the noon tip. Probably the biggest game of the day. You can argue against that, but Alabama 102, Kentucky 97 at Rupp Arena. This game was a crazy track meet, up and down. Threes were flying. Tons of free throws between the two teams, but it's the Crimson Tide that get the victory on the road. Mike, the concerns remain with Kentucky, but Alabama seems to be creeping up a little bit higher each time they play a big game.
Yeah, this is kind of like SEC football. There's not a whole lot of defense. But I will say Alabama, they've got a really good team. They've been putting up a lot of points this year. My concern is when you get to March, and it's the same concern I had with Kentucky last year, where Kentucky had an explosive offense. But when you have an off night in a big-time stage, sometimes the dance is going to end early for you. So I don't like teams that don't have great defenses in March. With that being said, Alabama, they've clearly been battle-tested, but this might be their signature win of the year. Going on the road to a tough place to play against a really good Kentucky team. Look, Kentucky's 8th in the country, and they 100% deserve to be there. So kudos to Alabama for getting the job done in this game. And they're going to be led by a myriad of players. They had 5 guys that were in double figures in this game. Grant Nelson, he led the way, 25 points, 11 boards. Mark Sears as well had 9 assists to go along with 24 points. So he almost had a double-double too. So, look, Crimson Tide, they're shooting the ball well. They're moving it great, but I'm really concerned about their lack of defensive efficiency.
Mike, I do think that Alabama is just kind of a better version of Kentucky right now. Explosive offense, poor defense.
Yeah.
Alabama ranks 43rd in defense. Kentucky's 89th. I think both of these teams remind me a lot of Kentucky last year.
Yes.
And we saw what happened with them. Dumped out by a Oakland team that got hot and made a couple threes. Again, over the sample size of the whole entire regular season, probably will even out pretty well, and they'll both have really good records. But, when You play potentially your last game of the year, and if you lose, you're going home. Stuff like that can happen still. Concern is definitely still there, but mentally, this is a big one from Alabama, coming off the home loss to Ole Miss, where they only scored 64 points. And they got on Kentucky quickly. They were winning for most of this game. I don't know if in control was the right word, but Kentucky was always kind of chasing it, and it's the Crimson Tide that back up a disappointing home loss with a huge road win. And for Kentucky, they are, still had a really nice week. They beat Mississippi State on the road last Saturday, and they beat Texas A&M on Tuesday. And still, a couple weeks ago, they beat Florida. And I'm not sure there's a ton, in the short term to be worried about with Kentucky, other than that March defense potentially haunting them again.
Yeah, I think we're going to learn a lot more in the coming weeks of this one. Look, Kentucky, they are giving up a lot of points, and they've had a couple of games that the offense hasn't clicked, like when they played on the road at Georgia. And look, Georgia's a good team, but they shouldn't be getting dominated on the road against UGA. So we've seen what happens when their offense doesn't click, and it's not pretty. Now, they've got a week to rest up before they play the Tennessee schools. They go on the road to play Vanderbilt, who is clearly shown to be one of the most improved teams in college basketball this year, if not the most improved team from a year ago. And then they've got to go to Rocky Top to take on Tennessee Volunteers. So Vanderbilt, or Kentucky rather, it's not going to get much easier for them, and it doesn't for anyone in the SEC this year. This is a powerful, powerful conference, one of the best that we've seen in a long time.
Mike, those two Tennessee schools actually played today in Nashville at Vanderbilt, and it was the Commodores that get the victory, 76-75 over Tennessee. The Vols fall to 16-2, while the Doors improved to 15-3. Mark Byington, early Coach of the Year candidate. The non-conference schedule was not the toughest. I don't think anybody will argue with that. They go 2-1 in the Charleston Classic. They take care of business elsewhere. They win a road pretend neutral game against TCU. They beat Virginia Tech on the road. And they start off SEC play well enough at 3-2, where, Mike, you got to say that Vanderbilt and West Virginia, very, very impressive. And it looks like the Commodores are at least in a decent spot to make the tournament at this point.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I would say Vanderbilt's got to be ranked. This was such
after this game, yeah.
You've got to be. Look, they're 15-3, very unproven going into the conference season, but they have responded very strongly. And look, they had a couple of unpleasant games. They barely beat LSU and then lost pretty emphatically to Mississippi State and Missouri, two good teams. But this is a huge win, right? We're going to learn more about Vanderbilt going forward. Like, it does not get any easier for them. They play three top 10 teams or three top 8 teams in 3 consecutive games. So we'll learn more about them. They've got Alabama this week, but you've got to love what Coach has done to be able to get his team to be playing at such a high level. You look at their stats. They got outshot by Tennessee in this game and still won. Look, Tennessee shot 48% from the field and 47% from 3. Vanderbilt was only made 8 threes in this game. So this wasn't a fluky game. This wasn't where, Tennessee just had an off night. Look, Tennessee scored pretty efficiently in this game, but it came down to execution. Vanderbilt, they got more offensive rebounds. They had a lot more second chance points, and they were able to get the job done at home. What kind of probably felt like a neutral crowd because of how many Tennessee fans were there.
Yeah, it doesn't get any easier for Vanderbilt. You are right. Looking at the schedule, they're going to be awfully happy that they get this Vanderbilt one, because that probably does allow them that they don't, they probably can go under 500 from here and still make the tournament, just with that really great non-conference record. Not really schedule, but you have to like where you're at for the Commodores. Jason Edwards, his Mark Byington's best player, James Madison leading the way. Michigan State's favorite, A.J. Hogard, right behind him. You get Tyler Nickel, who's a dead-eye three-point shooter. It's an interesting cast of characters, Mike, but it's working so far.
Yeah, Sean, I'm looking at this schedule coming down the stretch for
It's
Vanderbilt.
tough.
Oh my gosh, we got Florida, we've got Tennessee again, you got Kentucky twice, you've got Alabama once, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, UGA, and then Oklahoma's not ranked anymore, but Oklahoma's still clearly a good team. Sean, this is a crazy schedule.
Yep, that's why today's win
They needed it.
makes it a lot better because there's going to be a lot of losses ahead even if they keep playing well.
Yeah.
All right, Mike. Let's go to the Big East now. There were two games in the league today that we are going to talk about, and it was the ranked team at home, fairly significant favorites over their road underdog, and both times the road team won. Xavier, we'll start it off with them, goes up to Wisconsin and plays Marquette, and Sean Miller's Musketeers win an absolute breakfast, 59-57. Xavier gets to 12-7. It seems like they may have just turned a corner as the best of the rest in the Big East is trying to separate themselves to get a bid. But this was big from Xavier, and one of those games that was probably not the most fun to watch from the neutral, but the Xavier fans will certainly take it. But, Mike, think Xavier's headed in the right direction here?
Yeah, I mean, Xavier, they put a new meaning to winning ugly today. I'll tell you that. They had a pretty clear advantage in the first half. They were dominating Marquette on their home floor, but they didn't do it by shooting the ball that great. Look, they only made 2 3-point field goals the entire game. They shot 11%, 2-17. But like you said, great defense in this game. They outplayed and they were outcoached, they outcoached Shaka Smart. Sean Miller did a great job getting his team prepared. And you look at their last few games, beating DePaul is nothing crazy, but getting a win against Villanova at home was huge. Villanova is a good team, and I'm starting to come around to the fact that I think Villanova might be a tournament team. So Xavier getting that win is huge. And then to come to Marquette and get the W, look, they've got a very defining stretch of games coming forward that will determine the course of their season. You look at the next 3 games, they've got St. John's, UConn, and Creighton. I think they've got to win at least one of those. I think if they win 2 of those, they're starting to look okay. The rest of the season gets a lot easier for them from there. So if they can win 2 of their next 3, I really like the shape that they're in, even though they'll only be at 14-8. But you look at, they only played 8 guys in this game. And one of those guys only played for 2 minutes. That was John Healy the fourth. So you're playing 7 players deep. It's tough to win a ball game. We're seeing that a lot this year where depth is huge. But they were able to get the job done by rebounding the ball really well and taking care of the basketball. They got the job done against Marquette. And what you said, Sean, could not be described any better as a breakfast.
And Mike, a lot of these box scores, and we certainly can't watch every game. It's impossible. There's just nothing separating these teams in some of these box scores. Tennessee, Vanderbilt, essentially the same box score. This one, it's 23 field goals to 23 field goals, 37 rebounds to 39 rebounds, 8 threes to 2 threes, but then flip it around, 11 free throws to 3 free throws. There you go. I mean, it's
turnover, 11-13.
Yeah, there's just nothing separating these teams at this minute. Now, Big East tier-wise, I think Marquette and UConn are still the best 2 teams, and they both lost today. We'll get to the other game in a second. But that second tier, the third, fourth, and third spot probably belongs to St. John's at this point. But the fourth spot between Creighton, Villanova, and Xavier, I think, is kind of up for grabs. 2, maybe even all 3 can make the tournament. The Big East numbers do grade out pretty well. I think Georgetown has fallen off a little bit, and they are just behind them. But, Mike, I think the top 3 is pretty common at this point, but how do you see 4, 5, and 6 shaping out in the Big East?
Yeah, I mean, first off, Sean, if I'm being honest, I think St. John's is their 5th straight game against a not very good Seton Hall team. But look, St. John's, I think, has a really good They had a huge win again today. Creighton's won some big games this year. They've had some bad losses, but those quality wins are really going to help them come March. And then I think behind them, it's tough, but I think I'm going to put Villanova ahead of Xavier right now. And in Georgetown, they've got some soul. They've been losing a lot of basketball games lately. I think that's their fourth straight. And given the previous three were.
You got your back?
Can you not hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you.
All right, I think we're good. But yeah, Mike, I agree about Georgetown. I just think they kind of threw a couple teams off with actually how good they were early on. They had a couple really close losses against some of the good teams, and then the defense is playing pretty well, but the DePaul home loss is really crippling for them. I think that might close the curtain on their at-large chances at this point.
Yeah.
They didn't have a great non-con. They won a couple games. They lost big to Notre Dame at home, but it's good to see the Hoyas competing again, and they had their first sellout in like 14 years the other day, and it just seemed like that this might be 1 year short for the Hoyas at this point. But I think I agree with 4, 5, 6. Creighton's definitely fourth at this point. You'll look at their record, but they played a crazy non-con, and they were without players in most of those games.
Yeah.
And then it really comes down to Nova or Xavier. I think you have to give Nova the nod right now, even though that Xavier just beat them 4 days ago. But the Big East is razor thin. I think a little better than we thought. Looking like a 5-bid league at this point, and we'll just have to see what happens. But let's go to the other game that happened, Mike, and it was Creighton going on the road to Connecticut and taking down the Huskies at the Gamble Pavilion on the campus of UConn. But Creighton's defense has been really good for the last couple of years, and it shows up again today, holding the Huskies to just 63. Kalkbrenner was an absolute monster with 16 and 10. Jemiah Neal gets the offense going with 24, and then Stephen Ashworth 12, 9, and 6. But the Jays, Mike, they've got their players back, other than Pop Isaacs, who's out for the season, but it seemed like they might have overcome that really rough stretch in the non-con, and that they're starting to find their stride here in Big East play as they've taken down a really close fight at Marquette, and then they get UConn here on the road.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, Creighton has got some really good wins this year. Really, really good signature wins. It's tough to figure out which one it is. Is it this one? Is it the home win against KU? Look, they've been punched in the mouth this year, but they've always seemed to respond positively. So, look, Creighton right now has got to be in the tournament based off
for sure.
Their quality wins. Look, I'm not going to say that their losses, that 11-point loss at home to Nebraska isn't a black mark on their season, but it was an early game. People, I think, should be given an excuse for a bad performance in November. It happens. You look at the way that they have stepped up in conference play. Look, right now, they've got the same record in conference as UConn.
Yep.
Right? UConn's lost 2 of 3. Creighton's won 3 in a row. So, it gets a little tougher in February for Creighton. But, yeah, I agree, Sean. I think this is another team that not next week, but maybe the week after they get a couple wins, they're probably going to be back in the top 25.
Yeah,
they deserve to be.
They're in a good spot bracketology-wise, that if they can sort of get in that top 4 of the Big East, we're looking at probably a 7 seed or better. They'll probably have double-digit losses going in, but maybe if they even climb even higher, maybe 5 or 6 seed is on the table. But I think the Jays are okay, and it seems like, Mike, that they have a good stretch of games here. DePaul on the road, Seton Hall at home, and then Xavier at home. You'd have to think that if the Jays are where we think they are, they should take care of business in those 3. You never want to get too far ahead, but there's a extremely high likelihood that Creighton's sitting here at 8-2 and 15-6.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I will say, um, the Big East, and for the intents and purposes of bids in the NCAA tournament, with how bad of a start of the season that they had, they could not be in a better position. They
Yeah.
really could. Look, they've got their bottom dweller teams that are really sinking, like Seton Hall, like DePaul, but teams like Creighton and Villanova are really stepping up when we thought they were, chopped liver in the middle of November or into December.
And in terms of UConn, Mike, it's been a little bit of an interesting month for them. They had the some early wins at DePaul, at Georgetown. They had that weird loss at Villanova, and then they had a really, really close call at home to Providence. But it seems like that, we saw the lowest of the low for UConn. We saw them get back to a pretty elite level there, ended non-con into the beginning of Big East play, and it seems like they might just be headed on a little dip again. It's been a couple of games in a row of final scores that have not been where they should be, and I don't know if a slump is the necessary term for this, Mike, but they're just not playing as good as they were a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I've been saying this since December. I think a lot of people got hyped with UConn after they came back. They got the win against Baylor. They beat Texas on the road and they beat Gonzaga. They looked like they were back. I've been saying since then, I don't think that they're a national championship team this year. Sweet 16 team, sure. But even you go back to that Baylor game, they played a shorthanded Baylor team at home, and they almost found a way to cough that game up. Baylor didn't play a good game in that one. Look, Texas is not a very good team. They're not a tournament team this year. And then you step into conference play, and things are just not like they've just not been clean. They're not getting the same offensive production that they were getting earlier. You look at the last three games, they've scored 66, 68, and 63 points. They can't get to the 70 mark, and that's what's killing them. So, look, I am a little concerned about UConn. I think if the trend keeps, they're going to be probably a 5 or a 6 seed come March.
And Mike, the UConn is kind of similar analytically to the Alabamas and Kentuckys. They are seventh in offense and 124 in defense. They don't play as many possessions as Bama and Kentucky, so you're not going to see like a 101 to 93 type game, but they're not very efficient defensively. And then when you pair that with not probably scoring as much as you probably should, at least efficiency-wise, this can happen. And I do think they're probably about right where they're ranked 14th. That'll probably go down a little bit after the home loss to Creighton, but I think probably 20th is a pretty appropriate spot for the Huskies this year. We've seen the ceilings of the year. They beat a really good Gonzaga team in what was a home game at MSG with 90% UConn fans. They look pretty good there, but the floor of this team it is way lower than the last couple of years. They can lose to a lot more teams than they could the last few years, and unfortunately that is going to cost them. Not that Creighton's a bad team, but when you're playing an unranked team at home and you're ranked, you should probably win.
You got to win
convincingly. Like, you were up the whole game and it wasn't a sweat. That obviously didn't happen today. They'll have Butler at home, Xavier on the road, and DePaul at home in the next three before we turn the calendar to February, where they do see a couple of the better teams in a row. But, Mike, I think that runway for UConn that I just said to end out January might be the right time to get some of these bad teams in the league. Get back on the right track, stack some victories, and then see where you go from there when the tougher games come up.
Yeah, I mean, UConn certainly has a path to getting back on track, and it starts with winning some of these easier games. I will say this though: you can't protect your home court against an unranked team. I think they're susceptible to some upsets right now. I'm sure they're starting to feel a little bit of pressure, and I do think that Xavier game is going to be really tough. I personally, as I sit here today, I think Xavier's going to win that game.
Yeah, you would think Xavier would be slight favorites there with how they've been playing.
Exactly, and if they lose that game, look, if they win that game, I think that is a huge turnaround for them, and they can find their way forward until they get to February, when the schedule gets tough for a few games there. It's not easy when you got to go on the road to Marquette, host St. John's, and then go to Creighton. A lot of travel back and forth, but also you're playing two really tough environments. So that's not going to be easy for UConn. I will say, there are some conferences that have done travel really well this year, despite traveling long distances. The Big East does not seem to do that very well. Um, Having UConn go out to Wisconsin, that's a hike. Come back, and then their next game is back out at Creighton in Omaha, Nebraska. That is pretty inefficient traveling for Xavier. Coach Hurley can't be too pleased with that.
And then, Mike, they probably don't get on a plane for the better part of a month when they have an away game at Seton Hall, home game, away game at St. John's, home game, away game at Providence, home game, home game. So after that tough stretch, they probably don't get on a plane again until wherever they're going in the NCAA tournament, because they'll take a bus to MSG, they'll take a bus to Prudential, to Carnesecca, to Providence. We have seen West Coast trips in the Big Ten, stuff like that, Arizona trips in the Big 12. Doesn't seem like the Big East is trying that right now, and I think they did in the past, though, because a lot of teams, when they'd come to play UConn a couple years ago, would practice at Fairfield, and then they go play St. John's, or the other way around. So, we saw the Creighton team a couple times there. So I'm wondering what went wrong this year, because that is pretty ridiculous, Mike, when you talk about bouncing to the Midwest, back to the Midwest, and then not getting on a plane for a month and a half. Just a little interesting tidbit there if you're interested in that stuff. And in the age of national conferences, it is pretty interesting. And
that stuff matters too.
Oh, it does for sure, as Mick Cronin would say.
Yeah, Mick Cronin's got to travel a lot.
Yeah, he's seen the Statue of Liberty 2 times in 3 weeks.
Poor guy.
Yeah, well, they did look better the other day. But we're talking about the Big East for now, Mike, and I think that the way the standings are, we might see a couple of changes, but the tiers are certainly forming. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we got a clear idea who's the top 3, and then who's the next 3 that will be competing for 1, maybe 2 tournament bids. But like I said, the Big East, in terms of a multi-bid league, looking a hell of a lot better than they did just a couple of months ago, or just even a couple of weeks ago, for that matter.
And, Mike, it is the only true power conference left that plays a balanced schedule. You'll see everybody home. You'll see everybody away.
I love it.
And that is, the 11 teams is really the perfect size for for any conference, really. But that's a video for in the summer when we haven't got everything to talk about.
Yes, I agree, Sean.
Let's go out to the West Coast. Purdue goes on the road to play Oregon. Mike, the Ducks do lose this game. Purdue gets the 65-58 road victory. The Ducks fall to 15-3. They still have 7 quad 1 wins, but it's the Boilermakers that get the job done here. Seemed like that this was an important one for Purdue. They've taken care of business against who they should have so far for the most part, but when they faced up against elite opposition, Marquette, Auburn, they've been significantly outplayed. That was not the case today, and they pick up what will be remembered as probably one of their best wins of the year on the road at Oregon. But, Mike, Purdue wants to be in the top 4 of the Big Ten, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. And I think this was a really important victory for Purdue when you look at the rest of the season. Look, they're looking pretty good in the Big Ten. They're looking like right now they're going to hang around and compete for a championship in the Big Ten. It's been an impressive few days. They, like a few other schools, have conquered their West Coast battle. They beat Washington on Wednesday and then took it to Oregon today. Looking really good. It's not necessarily going to get easier for them. They've got Michigan on Friday, and then they've got Indiana the following Friday. So things are coming together. But then you look at the Oregon side, and Sean, this is such an inconsistent ball club.
It really is.
I mean, we saw
it really is.
Like one of the most inconsistent teams I've seen in the country this year. They've had some great victories. They've, like you said, 7 quad 1 wins. But then they go and host Illinois. This was a home game, and they lost by 32 points at home. We haven't seen a top 25 team lose by 30 plus points, maybe ever. And like that was embarrassing. Uh, and so I'm a little concerned if I'm an Oregon Duck fan. Look, they didn't give up 109 points this time. They only gave up 65. But where was the offense? Chucking up bricks as they were doing all game. They have, their court has a bunch of trees. Maybe it should have some bricks. I don't know on there instead.
It
But
is it
they
is
had a shot.
slightly less ugly than it has been over the years. It's actually, I wonder if the Big Ten stepped in and like, we're gonna get horrible ratings. You guys got to fix this. It is slightly less ugly. There are
Is it
still
really?
trees. Yes, yes, it is still ugly, but it is not turn the TV off ugly at this point.
I can't watch it,
Yeah,
man.
but Mike, I don't really get it with this team. And in the other, on our last In a Nutshell podcast, Joe and I were not arguing, but arguing for maybe Oregon belonging in that top tier of the Big Ten. I think it's pretty clear that there's a top four: the Michigan schools, Purdue, and Illinois, and then after that, we said 5th through 11th is probably going to be in flux all year, and whether Oregon would get sucked into that middle of the pack or whether they'd stay up near the double bye or the 5. And it looks like for now, Mike, that they are going to get sucked into the middle of the pack. They'll still get a really good seed because of their quad 1 wins, but it doesn't seem like they're going to compete for the Big Ten title.
And I think what's shocking about this, Sean, look, you expect a team that's got to travel as much as Oregon does to lose some games, right? They're going to lose games on the road because traveling is a beast for them, right? And they had a week to prepare for this game, so I'm not really giving them an excuse after they went on the road to Penn State and got the win, right? But it's not the road games that they're losing; it's the home games, and they're losing them in embarrassing fashion. Like I said, the Illinois game, and then this game too. So they're just not playing well against the best talent in this conference, and it's concerning if I am an Oregon Duck fan. Look, I agree with your assessment, Sean. I think there's a clear top four. I think that the best has got to be Illinois or Michigan State. Michigan had a pretty embarrassing loss this week that definitely tanked their stock a little bit. But when you look at the Big Ten, Illinois, they had a tough loss at home against USC this week, but that was without some star players. So they got back on the horse and made Indiana look pretty bad on Tuesday. Back on the road, a great win for them. And the game tomorrow against Michigan State, I think is going to crown who we think is going to be the front runner the rest of the year. Look, if Michigan State wins this game, they'll still be in the lead in the conference. They'll be, I think, like a half game ahead of Illinois. But don't get it twisted. I think if Illinois wins this game, they're probably going to be the favorite in the Big Ten the rest of the year.
Yeah, so it is a little bit odd with the teams playing such a different game amounts. You have Michigan State at 6-0, Purdue at 7-1, Michigan at 5-1, Illinois at 5-2. If Illinois drops to 5-3, 2.5, 3 games behind Michigan State, I think that might be hard to overcome, just with how solid Michigan State has been across the board. Joe and I have talked about this too. I think there will be some games that Michigan State loses. They seem to have a very narrow range of outcomes. They play pretty well. There will be a game where the other team gets hot on the road and they'll lose it, but they are not dropping any games. Well, obviously they're undefeated, but you can't see them dropping any games to the teams at the bottom of this league. And yeah, if you go to one of the middle of the pack teams on the road, you could lose, but you saw Michigan lose to Minnesota. It was their first win. You saw Illinois lose to USC at home. That was a tough loss to take. And then Purdue has, the huge loss on the road at Penn State. So all the other teams are kind of susceptible to a tough loss or a loss to a team that they probably shouldn't lose to. Doesn't seem like Michigan State is at this point. So if you're Illinois and you want to win the league, I think you probably have to win this game at Michigan State.
Yeah, I agree, especially when you look at Michigan State's upcoming schedule after this game. It's not that difficult for Michigan State for the next 3 to 4 weeks. They've got to play a Rutgers team that has been very disappointing this year. Minnesota's bad. And then you go and turn the calendar to February, and they've got USC and UCLA on the road. I don't think those teams are particularly good. I've made it very clear how I feel about Oregon. I don't think they're a very good team either. And then they've got a struggling Indiana team before they get back and play Illinois, Purdue, and Michigan after that. But that's not until the middle of February. So I think they have a good chance of going on a run on this stretch, and they're going to be in really good shape.
And they do play Illinois again, so there is a way that they can make that 2.5 game deficit
Drop. Yeah.
They can basically even it out if they split, but it's just an interesting situation here because there are 4 teams that have a legit shot at winning this league, and at this point, that hasn't been the case the last couple of years in the Big Ten. But that game tomorrow, Mike, will be a really good one, probably the game of the year so far in the Big Ten. The Spartans are slight favorites, 3.5 at home. Kasparis Yakashonis is back for Illinois. He played against Indiana in their 30-point victory on the road. Yakashonis had 21. Honestly, could have had more, but they managed his minutes with him coming back from an injury after and a significant lead. But Illinois seems to have shook off that USC game. It's just kind of a bad day. And Michigan State is 6-0 in the Big Ten, and with a pretty favorable runway ahead, at least the next couple games, Mike. Michigan State's going to be looking at this one and let's empty the tank because we could really send a message. Now, they've sent a couple messages already this year, but they can maybe start to pull away from the pack here. There's 2 other teams with just 1 loss, but they're going to put themselves in the driver's seat to win this league, and if they win it, and then if Illinois wins it and they get to 6-2, that brings everybody right next to each other.
Yeah.
The Illini will have 2 losses, and the other 3 will have 1. So this is a big sort of inflection point on the season in the Big Ten, this game tomorrow in East Lansing. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think, it pains me to say this. I think Michigan State probably has the advantage. They're at home, and I think our friend Joe would agree. Tom Izzo has a way of manipulating the crowd to help manipulate the guys in jail stripes. So I think, that's worth a few points for sure. Michigan State's a really good team, and I don't want to take anything away from them. I think they're going to get the job done tomorrow against the Fighting Illini.
Now, you'd have to think that Illinois might actually be the worst matchup in the league for Michigan State with their volatility because Michigan State is so steady. So I really could see this being anywhere from like a 20-point Illinois win to a 15-point Michigan State win. And Illinois has proven that they can beat tournament-quality teams by 30-plus on the road. And Indiana is struggling, but they are in the projections right now because they did pick up a quad 1 win yesterday. Oregon also, they'll still get in with how many quad 1 wins they have. But Illinois is just really volatile, and I think that there is certainly an outcome where Illinois goes in there, punches them in the face, and wins pretty handily. But I would have to say 6 out of 10 times I think the Spartans get the job done. But it's truly one of the more coin toss games that we've seen at the top of the sport this year, and it should be a good one. It's not overshadowed by anything else being on a Sunday at noon on CBS. Obviously, a lot of the games happen today, big ones in the SEC, but they all kind of take the attention away from each other. But that's a big one, Mike, and I think that we're going to wrap this one up unless you got anything else to add.
No, I got nothing else. Hey, one thing. Memphis is kind of doing the same thing that we saw last year. Played well, executed in the out of conference, and they're not looking good in the in conference. They've won a couple games lately by the skin of their teeth, but then dropped one against Temple. So I'm a little bit concerned. I'm not quite pressing the panic button on the Tigers yet, but I'm getting pretty close to.
And they'll play tomorrow at Charlotte at 3 o'clock on ESPN2. They are 12 or 11.5 point favorites. You'd have to hope for Memphis that they get the job done in a convincing fashion there. Because, Mike, one loss can be written off as a bad performance if you win the next 3, but, it always starts with 1. So We've seen it before. Hopefully we don't see it again. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this episode of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. We'll see you next time.